I never thought the worst day of my professional life would become the catalyst for discovering who my family really was. Standing in that sterile conference room, watching my career crumble in real time, I had no idea that my family's reaction would cut deeper than losing my job ever could. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that 18 months earlier, I had quietly sold my software company for $12 million. As they wrote me off as a failure, I was sitting on enough money to never work again. The fluorescent lights in the conference room at Morrison Associates felt harsher than usual that Tuesday morning in March. I sat across from my supervisor, Helen Carter, watching her shuffle through paperwork with the kind of deliberate slowness that signals bad news. After 6 years as a senior project manager at this marketing firm, I thought I'd earned some job security. I was wrong. "Natasha, I'm going to be direct," Helen began, her voice carrying that practiced tone executives use when delivering devastating news. "The company is restructuring. Your position is being eliminated effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd sensed something was coming. Budget meetings had been more frequent lately, hushed conversations stopped when I entered rooms, and my latest project proposals had been shelved without explanation. Still, hearing it confirmed felt surreal. "Eliminated?" I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. "Helen, I've consistently exceeded my targets." The Brennan campaign I managed last quarter brought in 3 new major clients. She nodded sympathetically, though her eyes never quite met mine. "Your work has been excellent, Natasha. This isn't about performance. It's about company direction. We're consolidating departments and bringing in external consultants for project management going forward." External consultants, the corporate euphemism for cheaper contractors without benefits or job security. I understood the economics, but that didn't make the rejection any less brutal. "What's my severance package?" I asked, already mentally calculating how long I could maintain my downtown Denver loft without income. 2 weeks' pay," Helen replied, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Everything's detailed in here, including information about Cobra health insurance continuation." 2 weeks. After 6 years of 60-hour work weeks, missed holidays, and building campaigns that significantly increased their revenue, I was worth exactly 14 days of salary. The insulting nature of it was almost worse than the job loss itself. I walked out of Morrison Associates that morning carrying a cardboard box with 6 years of professional life crammed inside. Personal photos, a coffee mug with my college, alma mater logo, a small succulent plant that had somehow survived countless late nights in my cubicle. The security guard who escorted me to the parking garage was polite but firm, as if I might suddenly turn into a corporate spy intent on stealing trade secrets. Sitting in my Honda Civic in the parking structure, I stared at my phone, knowing I needed to make the call I was dreading most. My father would want to know immediately. David Reynolds had always prided himself on being a practical man who planned for every contingency. In his worldview, job loss was a personal failing that reflected poor career decisions and inadequate preparation. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. "Natasha? Calling during work hours?" "Dad, I need to tell you something. I lost my job today. Morrison Associates eliminated my position." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a disappointment that I felt in my chest. "Lost your job? How does someone just lose their job, Natasha? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything wrong, Dad. It was a company restructuring, budget cuts." "There's always more to these situations than people want to admit," he said, his tone growing colder. "Companies don't eliminate positions held by valuable employees. They eliminate positions held by people who aren't essential. His words stung because they echoed my own worst fears. Despite Helen's assurances about my performance, being eliminated felt like a public declaration of professional inadequacy. But hearing it from my father, stated so matter-of-factly, was devastating. "Dad, that's not fair. I consistently got excellent reviews and brought in major accounts." "If that were true, you'd still have a job," he replied with the kind of brutal logic that had always characterized our relationship. "What's your plan now? Please tell me you have savings." I did have savings, $12 million worth, in fact, but that money represented a chapter of my life I'd never shared with anyone in my family. 2 years ago, I'd sold TechFlow Solutions, the business process automation company I'd built during evenings and weekends while working at Morrison Associates. The sale had been private, the buyer had requested confidentiality, and I'd honored that agreement even with my closest family members. "I have some money set aside," I said carefully. "I'm not going to be homeless, Dad." "Some money set aside?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Natasha, you're 32 years old. At your age, I owned my house outright and had a substantial retirement account. Living paycheck to paycheck is not a sustainable life strategy." My father's criticism wasn't new, but it felt especially sharp given the circumstances. David Reynolds had built a successful accounting practice through decades of careful planning and conservative investments. He measured success in tangible assets and steady income streams. From his perspective, losing a job at my age suggested fundamental character flaws. "I should probably call Victoria and let her know," I said, referring to my stepmother. "I won't. Be able to make it to Kyle's graduation dinner on Friday if I'm job hunting." "Actually, about that dinner," Dad said, his voice taking on a different quality. "Victoria thinks it might be better if you skip this one." The words didn't immediately register. Skip Kyle's graduation dinner? Why would I skip it? "She's concerned about the atmosphere," he explained, clearly uncomfortable. "Kyle's accomplished something significant, graduating from business school with honors. Victoria wants the evening to be celebratory, focused on his achievement. She's worried that having you there, given your current situation, might bring down the mood." I sat in stunned silence, processing what my father had just said. My stepbrother Kyle, Victoria's son from her previous marriage, was graduating, with his MBA from the University of Denver. It was undoubtedly an achievement worth celebrating. But the suggestion that my presence would somehow taint his celebration felt like a slap. "Bring down the mood?" I repeated. "Dad, I'm his sister. I've been part of this family for 8 years since you married Victoria." "You're his stepsister," he corrected, a distinction that felt unnecessarily sharp. "And Victoria's point is that this dinner is about Kyle's success, his bright future. Having someone there who just lost their job, who's facing uncertainty, it changes the dynamic." The logic was so twisted it took me a moment to formulate a response. "So I'm being uninvited from a family dinner because I lost my job? That's when family is supposed to support each other, Dad. It's not permanent, Natasha, just for this particular celebration. Once you get back on your feet, once you have something positive to contribute to the conversation, you'll be welcome at family gatherings again." Something positive to contribute to the conversation. As if my presence at a family dinner required me to justify my worth through professional achievements. As if losing a job had somehow made me contagious with failure. "Dad, do you hear yourself right now? You're essentially telling me that I'm not good enough to sit at the same table as Kyle because he's succeeding and I'm not." "That's not what I'm saying," he protested, though his tone suggested he knew exactly what he was saying. "It's about being considerate of others. Kyle worked hard for this degree. He deserves to have his moment without distractions." Distractions. That's what I'd become in my own family. A distraction from other people's success stories. "Fine," I said, my voice hollow. I'll skip the dinner. Congratulations to Kyle. Natasha, don't be dramatic about this. It's just one dinner. But we both knew it wasn't just one dinner. It was a line being drawn, a categorization of family members into those worth celebrating and those who brought down the mood. It was my stepmother successfully convincing my father that I was somehow a liability to their social gatherings. After ending the call, I sat in the parking garage for another 20 minutes, trying to process the double blow of job loss and family rejection. The combination felt surreal. In the span of 2 hours, I'd gone from being an employed professional with a family support system to an unemployed burden that others needed to be protected from. I drove home to my loft in downtown Denver. The city skyline blurred through tears I hadn't realized I was crying. The apartment had always been my sanctuary, a space I'd chosen and decorated to reflect my own taste rather than anyone else's expectations. The exposed brick walls, the large windows overlooking the city, the carefully curated furniture that mixed modern and vintage pieces, it all represented independence and success. But walking into that space after the morning's events, it felt different, fragile, maybe, temporary. Without steady income, how long could I maintain this lifestyle? The question felt both practical and existential. I poured myself a glass of wine, even though it was barely past noon, and sat on my couch staring at the manila envelope Helen had given me. Inside would be the official termination paperwork, information about final paychecks, details about health insurance continuation. The bureaucratic aftermath of professional failure. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sophie Rivera, my closest friend since college. How did the morning go? Coffee later? I'd mentioned to Sophie the previous week that work felt uncertain, though I hadn't shared the extent of my concerns. She was one of the few people who knew about TechFlow Solutions and the sale, having helped me navigate some of the legal complexity as a paralegal at a downtown law firm. I texted back. Lost. The job? Family dinner canceled. Could use that coffee. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her response was immediate. OMG, coming over now. Wine, not coffee. Sophie arrived within an hour, carrying a bottle of good red wine and wearing the expression of someone prepared for emotional triage. She'd been my sounding board through every major life event since we'd met in our sophomore year at Colorado State University. If anyone could help me make sense of this day, it was her. Tell me everything, she said, settling onto my couch with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd provided crisis support many times before. I walked her through the morning chronologically, from Helen's conference room announcement to my father's phone call to Victoria's intervention regarding Kyle's dinner. With each detail, Sophie's expression grew more incredulous. Wait, back up, she interrupted when I reached the part about being uninvited from the family dinner. Your stepmother convinced your dad to exclude you from a family celebration because you lost your job. That's not how functional families work, Natasha. According to Dad, it's about being considerate of Kyle's achievement, not bringing down the mood with my professional failure. Sophie stared at me for a long moment, then walked to my kitchen and returned with 2 wine glasses. Your family doesn't know about the TechFlow sale, do they? No. The buyer requested confidentiality as part of the agreement. I've honored that. Even with family? Especially with family, I admitted. You know how my dad is about money and success. If he knew I had $12 million sitting in investment accounts, it would change everything about our relationship. He'd want to know why I was still working at Morrison Associates, why I hadn't bought a house, why I hadn't made different choices. Sophie poured wine for both of us, her movements thoughtful. So while they're treating you like a failure, who needs to be hidden from polite society, you're actually financially set for life. Essentially, yes. That's insane, Natasha. It's actually insane that they're judging your worth based on a corporate job when you built and sold a company for more money than most people see in a lifetime. The irony wasn't lost on me. TechFlow Solutions had started as a side project, something I worked on during evenings and weekends while maintaining my day job at Morrison Associates. I'd identified inefficiencies in business process automation and developed software solutions that streamlined operations for small and medium-sized companies. What began as freelance consulting evolved into a legitimate software company. I'd invested my savings into product development, hired contractors for specialized work, and gradually built a client base that included some major regional businesses. The whole operation was lean and efficient, designed to complement rather than replace my primary employment. When Global Tech Industries approached me about acquiring TechFlow Solutions, I'd been stunned by their offer. $12 million for a company I'd built in my spare time felt like winning the lottery. The acquisition closed 18 months ago, with the money invested in a diversified portfolio that had grown to nearly $14 million. Yet here I was, being treated like a family embarrassment because I'd lost a job I'd only kept out of habit and professional inertia. "Why haven't you told them?" Sophie asked. "I mean, I understand the confidentiality agreement with the buyer, but that was 18 months ago. Surely you could share it with family now." I considered the question, one I'd asked myself many times, because it would change everything in ways I'm not sure I want. Dad would have opinions about my investment strategy, my life choices, my continued employment. Victoria would suddenly be much more interested in maintaining a relationship with me. Kyle would probably see me differently. And that's bad because I want relationships based on who I am, not what I have. The same people who are excluding me from family dinners because I lost a job would probably treat me very differently if they knew about the money. That doesn't feel authentic. Sophie nodded slowly, understanding the complexity. But they're not treating you well based on who you are. They're treating you poorly based on a job status that doesn't actually reflect your situation. She was right, of course. My desire for authentic relationships was being undermined by the very people I was trying to protect from the influence of money. By hiding my financial success, I'd created space for them to reveal their true character, and that revelation was deeply unflattering. "What are you going to do?" Sophie asked. I looked around my loft, at the life I'd built independently, at the success I'd achieved quietly. For the first time since Helen's conference room announcement, I felt something other than hurt and confusion. I felt angry. "I'm going to figure out who my real family is," I said finally. "And I'm going to stop protecting people who don't deserve protection." The decision felt both scary and liberating. For too long, I'd accommodated other people's limited vision of who I should be and what I should achieve. I'd allowed my worth to be measured by external markers that didn't reflect my actual situation or capabilities. But losing my job, painful as it was, had revealed something important about the people closest to me. Their conditional love and support wasn't worth preserving through careful image management and financial secrecy. As Sophie and I finished the bottle of wine, I felt the first stirrings of a plan forming. Tomorrow, I would start making some calls. It was time for certain truths to come to light, regardless of how uncomfortable they made other people. My family thought they knew who I was. They were about to discover how wrong they'd been. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that would shift everything I thought I understood about my situation. I was still in bed, having spent a restless night alternating between anger at my family and anxiety about my professional future, when my phone rang at 8:15. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something about the Denver area code made me answer. "Natasha Reynolds?" The voice was professional, crisp, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Yes, this is Natasha." "Ms. Reynolds, my name is Jonathan Hayes. I'm a financial advisor with Cornerstone Wealth Management. I apologize for calling so early, but I have some time-sensitive information regarding your investment portfolio. I sat up straighter, immediately alert. Jonathan Hayes managed the diversified portfolio where my TechFlow Solutions money had been invested for the past 18 months. We'd spoken perhaps 3 times since the initial setup, usually for quarterly reviews that showed steady growth. "Is there a problem with the account?" I asked, my mind already jumping to worst-case scenarios. Market crashes, investment fraud, administrative errors that could wipe out my financial security. "Not a problem exactly, more of an opportunity that requires quick decision-making." Jonathan's tone was measured but carried an undercurrent of excitement. "Are you familiar with Meridian Technologies?" The name was vaguely familiar, something I'd seen in business journals. "Software development company, based in California." "Correct. They're going public next month. And through our institutional connections, we have access to pre-IPO shares at $22 each. Based on our analysis and similar companies' public offerings, we're projecting the stock will open between $45 and $50 per share on the first day of trading." I was still processing this information when Jonathan continued. "Given your risk tolerance profile and the performance of your current portfolio, I'm recommending we allocate $2 million to this opportunity. If our projections are accurate, you could see returns of over 100% within the first quarter." $2 million. The casual way he mentioned that amount highlighted just how surreal my financial situation had become. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been worried about maintaining my apartment without a steady paycheck. Now, my financial advisor was recommending I risk more money than most people earn in a lifetime on a single investment. "Jonathan, can I ask you something? Yesterday I lost my job. I'm unemployed. Doesn't that change the risk assessment for my portfolio?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear him reviewing my file. "Ms. Reynolds, based on your current asset allocation and the growth we've seen over the past 18 months, employment status doesn't significantly impact our investment strategy. Your portfolio has grown to approximately $14.3 million. Even if we allocate $2 million to this pre-IPO opportunity, you'd still have over $12 million in diversified liquid assets. $14.3 million. The number hit me like a physical force. In 18 months, my nest egg had grown by over $2 million simply through careful investment management. While I'd been stressing about 2 weeks of severance pay, I'd been earning more in passive investment returns than most people make in annual salaries. "I need to think about this," I said, though part of me was already intrigued by the opportunity. "Can you send me the analysis on Meridian Technologies?" "Absolutely. I'll email the full prospectus and our internal evaluation within the hour. But Natasha, I do need a decision by tomorrow afternoon. The pre-IPO window closes Friday morning." After ending the call, I sat in my bed staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the conversation I'd just had with my father's assessment of my financial irresponsibility. According to him, I was living paycheck to paycheck without adequate savings. According to my financial advisor, I had enough money to make 7-figure investment decisions without impacting my lifestyle. The disconnect was jarring, but it also clarified something important about my family's understanding of who I actually was. They'd constructed an image of me based on limited information and their own assumptions, then treated that image as reality. The gap between their perception and my actual circumstances was enormous. My phone buzzed with a text from Kyle, my stepbrother. "Hey Natasha, heard about your job. Sorry that sucks. See you at dinner Friday?" The message was friendly enough, but it revealed that he didn't know about Victoria's intervention to exclude me from his graduation celebration. As far as Kyle knew, I was still invited to the family dinner honoring his MBA achievement. I stared at the text for several minutes, considering how to respond. The easy path would be to make some excuse about being busy with job hunting, preserving the family harmony while quietly accepting my exclusion. That's probably what the old version of myself would have done, prioritizing other people's comfort over my own dignity. but something had shifted in me since yesterday's revelations. Maybe it was the stark contrast between my family's dismissive treatment and Jonathan's respectful professional approach to my financial decisions. Maybe it was the realization that I'd been hiding my success to protect relationships with people who couldn't be bothered to support me during apparent failure. I texted back, "Thanks, Kyle. Actually, your mom asked Dad to uninvite me because she thought my job loss would bring down the mood at your celebration dinner. You might want to check with them about whether I'm still welcome." I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then immediately felt a mixture of satisfaction and nervousness. By putting the family dynamics in writing, I'd forced Kyle to confront his mother's behavior rather than letting it remain a quiet arrangement between adults. His response came quickly. "What? Mom said that? That's messed up. Of course you're invited. It's my graduation dinner." Then, a few minutes later, "Just talked to Mom. She says there was a misunderstanding. You're definitely invited. She's going to call you." A misunderstanding. That was one way to characterize deliberately excluding a family member from a celebration. I wondered how Victoria would frame this conversation when she called, how she'd attempt to smooth over what had been a clear and intentional slight. The call came an hour later, just as I was reading through Jonathan's email about the Meridian Technologies investment opportunity. "Natasha, honey, Kyle tells me there's been some confusion about Friday's dinner." Victoria's voice carried that artificially sweet tone she used when trying to manage social situations. "Of course you're invited. I don't know how these mixed signals happened." "Victoria, you specifically told Dad that my presence would bring down the mood because I'd lost my job. There's no confusion about that." A pause. "I think you may have misunderstood the conversation. I was simply concerned that you might not feel comfortable celebrating Kyle's achievement when you're dealing with your own challenges. I was trying to be considerate of your feelings." The gaslighting was so smooth I almost admired its execution. Victoria was reframing her exclusion as consideration for my emotional well-being, making herself the thoughtful family member protecting me from potentially uncomfortable social dynamics. "So you were uninviting me for my own good?" I asked. "I wasn't uninviting anyone. I was suggesting that maybe you'd prefer to have some time to process your job situation before joining family celebrations." But clearly I was wrong, and I apologize for any hurt feelings. Hurt feelings. As if the issue was my emotional sensitivity, rather than her deliberate attempt to exclude me from family events based on employment status. "Victoria, let me be very clear. I want to be at Kyle's graduation dinner. I've been part of this family for 8 years, and Kyle's achievements matter to me regardless of my own professional situation." "Of course they do, and you absolutely should be there. I'm looking forward to seeing you Friday evening." The conversation ended with artificial warmth and unresolved tension. Victoria had backed down when confronted directly, but her initial impulse had been telling. In her worldview, family inclusion was contingent on maintaining certain appearances, meeting certain standards of conventional success. I spent the rest of the morning researching Meridian Technologies, reading through Jonathan's analysis and cross-referencing it with independent market research. The investment opportunity was compelling, exactly the kind of strategic move that could significantly accelerate my already impressive portfolio growth. But more than the financial implications, the decision represented something symbolic. Could continue living like someone worried about 2 weeks of severance pay, or I could start making choices that reflected my actual financial position. I could keep accommodating other people's limited vision of my capabilities, or I could begin operating from a place of authentic strength. I called Jonathan back at 2 o'clock. "I want to move forward with the Meridian Technologies investment," I told him. $2 million as you recommended." "Excellent decision, Natasha. I'll initiate the transfer today. You should see the pre-IPO shares in your account by tomorrow afternoon." $2 million deployed with a single phone call. The ease of it was both thrilling and slightly terrifying. I'd just made a larger financial decision than most people face in their entire lives, and it barely impacted my overall portfolio allocation. That afternoon, I drove to Cherry Hills, the upscale Denver suburb where my father and Victoria lived. Their house was a testament to conventional success. A large colonial-style home with perfectly manicured landscaping in an exclusive neighborhood where property values reflected social status. I hadn't announced my visit, partly because I wanted to catch them off guard, but mostly because I needed to see them in person to have the conversation I'd been avoiding for too long. Victoria answered the door wearing tennis attire, clearly having just returned from the country club where she spent most afternoons. Her surprise at seeing me was genuine, though she recovered quickly. "Natasha, what a lovely surprise. Come in. Your father's in his study. I'll get him." The house hadn't changed much since my last visit several months ago. Expensive furniture, carefully chosen art pieces, everything arranged to project affluence and good taste. It was beautiful in a catalog-perfect way, but it had never felt particularly warm or welcoming to me. Dad emerged from his study looking puzzled by my unexpected visit. "Natasha, is everything all right? You didn't mention you were coming by. I wanted to talk to both of you about something important," I said, settling into one of their living room chairs. "About how you've been treating me since I lost my job." Victoria and Dad exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that happens between married couples when they sense trouble. "Sweetheart, if this is about the dinner confusion," Victoria explained that was just a misunderstanding, Dad said carefully. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Dad. It was a deliberate decision to exclude me from a family celebration because my job loss was seen as socially embarrassing. Let's be honest about what happened." Victoria shifted uncomfortably, but her expression remained composed. "Natasha, I think you're reading too much into a simple suggestion. I was genuinely concerned about your comfort level." "No, you weren't. You were concerned about how my presence would reflect on the family image. You were worried that having an unemployed family member at Kyle's celebration would diminish the evening's success narrative." The accusation hung in the air, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Dad looked genuinely uncomfortable while Victoria maintained her carefully controlled expression. "That's not fair, Natasha," Dad said finally. "We're your family. We want what's best for you." "Do you? Because what's best for me would be support during a difficult transition, not exclusion from family events. What's best for me would be the assumption that I can handle social situations without bringing down everyone's mood." I paused, looking at both of them, these people who thought they knew me so well. "But here's the thing you don't understand. You've been making assumptions about my situation based on incomplete information." "What do you mean?" Victoria asked, her tone cautious. "I mean that while you've been treating me like a financial disaster who needs to be hidden from polite society, I've actually been sitting on more money than either of you have ever seen." Dad's eyebrows furrowed. "Natasha, what are you talking about?" 2 years ago, I sold a software company I'd built in my spare time. TechFlow Solutions. I sold it for $12 million. The silence that followed was profound. Dad's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, while Victoria's careful composure finally cracked. $12 million? Dad repeated, slowly. $12 million, which has grown to over $14 million through investment management. This morning, I made a $2 million investment decision while you were worried about me living paycheck to paycheck. Victoria found her voice first. "Why didn't you tell us? If you had that kind of money, why were you still working at that marketing firm?" "Because I wanted to maintain normal relationships with people who cared about me for who I was, not what I had. I wanted family connections based on genuine affection, not financial interest." Dad was staring at me as if seeing a stranger. $14 million. You've had $14 million this whole time. And you excluded me from Kyle's graduation dinner because you thought I was a broke failure who would embarrass the family. Do you see the irony in that? The question forced them to confront the gap between their assumptions and reality. They'd judged my worth based on a single data point, my employment status, while remaining completely ignorant of my actual circumstances. Natasha, I don't know what to say, Victoria admitted. If you'd known, you would have treated me differently. That's exactly the problem. Your treatment of me shouldn't depend on my bank account balance. It should depend on the fact that I'm family. Dad was shaking his head slowly, still processing the revelation. Why didn't you buy a house? Why didn't you quit that job? Why didn't you make different choices if you had that kind of money? Because having money doesn't obligate me to spend it in ways that make sense to other people. I liked my apartment. I found meaning in my work. I wanted to live according to my own values, not other people's expectations about how wealthy people should behave. The conversation continued for another hour, but the fundamental dynamic had shifted irreversibly. The family members who had excluded me based on perceived failure were now grappling with the reality that I was more financially successful than any of them. Their shock was genuine, but so was their immediate recalibration of how they viewed me. I could see Victoria's mind working, probably thinking about how to incorporate this new information into her social narratives. Dad was clearly struggling with his own assumptions about success and responsibility. As I drove home that evening, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The truth was finally out, but the relationships I'd hoped to preserve through secrecy had already been damaged by their conditional nature. Tomorrow would bring Kyle's graduation dinner, the first family event where I'd attend as my authentic self, rather than the image others had constructed. It would be interesting to see how the dynamics played out when everyone understood who was actually sitting at the table. Friday evening arrived with an unseasonable warmth that seemed to mirror the charged atmosphere surrounding Kyle's graduation dinner. I chose my outfit carefully, settling on a navy blue dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, paired with understated jewelry that hinted at quality without screaming expense. The goal was to look like myself, successful but not trying to prove anything through material display. The Sterling Room occupied the top floor of a downtown Denver high-rise, offering panoramic views of the city and mountains beyond. It was exactly the kind of venue Victoria would choose for a celebration meant to impress, expensive enough to signal importance while maintaining the sophisticated atmosphere she cultivated for family events. I arrived precisely on time, something that had always been important to me but now carried additional weight. This wasn't just punctuality. It was a statement about respecting commitments and treating family obligations seriously, regardless of recent revelations or past slights. The hostess led me to a private dining room where the family had already gathered. Kyle stood near the windows in a sharp charcoal suit, looking every inch the accomplished MBA graduate. He was animated, clearly excited about his achievement and the attention it was bringing him. Dad sat at the head of the table wearing his best navy blazer, the one he reserved for special occasions. Victoria had chosen a cream-colored dress with gold accessories, her appearance perfectly coordinated as always. But there was something different in the air when I entered, a tension that hadn't existed at previous family gatherings, a heightened awareness that came from everyone knowing the conversation we'd had 2 days earlier had fundamentally changed our dynamic. Natasha. Kyle crossed the room immediately, pulling me into a warm hug that felt genuinely affectionate. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm sorry about the whole invitation confusion thing. That was ridiculous. His embrace was uncomplicated, free from the social calculation that had characterized recent interactions with Dad and Victoria. Kyle had always been the most straightforward member of our blended family, perhaps because he'd been a teenager when our parents married and had never fully absorbed the adult complexities of family politics. Congratulations on your graduation, I said, meaning it completely. MBA from DU with honors is a serious achievement. You should be proud. Thanks. It feels pretty surreal actually having it finished. 2 years of case studies and group projects. And now suddenly I'm supposed to be ready for the business world. Victoria approached with her social smile firmly in place, though I could detect a careful quality to her movements, as if she were walking through a minefield. "Natasha, you look lovely. Thank you for joining us tonight." The politeness was perfect on the surface, but underneath lay an awareness of our recent conversation and the dramatic shift in family dynamics it had created. She was treating me with a deference that hadn't existed before, subtle but unmistakable. Dad stood and offered a slightly awkward half-hug, the kind of physical affection that suggested emotional uncertainty. "Glad you could make it, sweetheart. Shall we sit down? I made sure to request your favorite wine." The gesture was small, but significant. Dad had remembered my preference for Pinot Noir from Oregon, something he'd never bothered to note during previous family dinners. The attention to my preferences felt like an attempt at reconciliation, an acknowledgement that perhaps he'd been taking my presence for granted. As we settled around the table, Kyle raised his water glass in a mock toast. "To family dinners without drama," he said with a grin that suggested he was only half joking. "To Kyle's graduation," I countered, raising my own glass. "To new beginnings and exciting opportunities." The sentiment was genuine, but it carried multiple layers of meaning that weren't lost on the adults at the table. My new beginning included a radically different relationship with family members who now understood my actual circumstances. Kyle's exciting opportunities were launching from a foundation of family support that I'd been denied during my own career transition. Victoria seemed to recognize the subtext. "Speaking of new beginnings, Natasha, have you given any thought to what you'd like to do next professionally? With your experience and, well, your resources, you have tremendous flexibility." The question was carefully phrased to acknowledge my financial independence without dwelling on the fact that she'd completely misjudged my situation. It was also the first time anyone in my family had asked about my career plans in terms of what I wanted rather than what I needed to do to survive. "I'm considering several options," I replied. "I might start my own consulting firm focusing on business process optimization. Or I could invest in other entrepreneurs who are building companies in areas I understand. Having financial freedom means I can make decisions based on passion rather than just necessity." Dad leaned forward with interest. "Your own consulting firm? That's a significant undertaking. Do you have the client base to support that kind of venture?" The question revealed how little he understood about what I'd accomplished with TechFlow Solutions. Building and selling a software company for $12 million required exactly the kind of client relationships and industry expertise that would support a successful consulting practice. "Dad, I spent 2 years building a company that served dozens of clients across multiple industries. The relationships I developed during that process, combined with the credibility that comes from a successful exit, would actually make launching a consulting firm relatively straightforward." Kyle looked fascinated. "Wait, back up. You built and sold a company? Like, you were an entrepreneur this whole time?" I realized that while Dad and Victoria had been stunned by the financial revelation, they'd missed the broader implications of what building TechFlow Solutions actually meant. To them, the $12 million was the shocking part. They hadn't fully processed the fact that I'd successfully launched, grown, and exited a technology business while maintaining a full-time job. TechFlow Solutions, I explained to Kyle. Business process automation software. I started it as a side project, working evenings and weekends while keeping my day job. Over 2 years, it grew into a legitimate company with major clients and proprietary technology. When global tech industries offered to acquire it, the sale gave me complete financial independence. Kyle's expression shifted from interest to something approaching awe. "That's incredible. You literally built a multi-million-dollar company in your spare time?" It wasn't quite that simple, but essentially yes. I identified a market need, developed software solutions, built client relationships, and created enough value that a major corporation wanted to acquire the technology and customer base. Victoria had been listening with growing comprehension. So, when you say you're considering starting a consulting firm, you're not talking about freelancing. You're talking about building another business. Exactly. Or I might invest in other entrepreneurs who are where I was 3 years ago, needing capital and expertise to scale their ideas. Having been through the process successfully gives me insights that could be valuable to other founders. The conversation was revealing layers of accomplishment that my family had never known existed. They'd seen me as a marketing employee at a mid-sized firm, someone whose career ambitions were limited to climbing the corporate ladder. The reality was that I'd already succeeded as an entrepreneur while they weren't paying attention. Dad was shaking his head slowly. Natasha, I have to ask, why didn't you tell us about any of this? Building a company, making that kind of money. It's extraordinary. We should have been celebrating your success years ago. The question I'd been expecting finally arrived, though I wasn't sure Dad was prepared for the honest answer. Because I wanted to maintain authentic relationships with people who cared about me for who I was, not what I'd achieved or how much money I had. I wanted family connections based on genuine affection, not on being impressed by my bank account. Kyle nodded thoughtfully. That actually makes sense. Money changes how people treat you, right? Even family. Especially family, I agreed. Look at this dinner. 2 days ago, Victoria thought my job loss made me unsuitable for family celebrations. Tonight, she's asking about my career plans with respect and interest. The only thing that changed was information about my financial situation. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Victoria's face flushed slightly, though she maintained her composure. That's not entirely fair, Natasha. Yes, I was concerned about the timing of the dinner relative to your job loss, but that was about your emotional well-being, not your financial status. Was it, though? Would you have suggested excluding me if I'd lost my job but you'd known about the TechFlow sale? Would my unemployment have been emotionally devastating if you'd understood it was by choice rather than necessity? The questions forced Victoria to confront the conditional nature of her concern. Her worry about my emotional well-being had been directly tied to assumptions about my financial vulnerability. Remove the perceived financial distress, and suddenly my job loss became a career transition rather than a personal crisis. Dad intervened before Victoria could respond. I think we can all agree that there have been misunderstandings and poor communication. What matters now is moving forward as a family that supports each other regardless of circumstances. It was a diplomatic answer, but it sidestepped the fundamental issue that their support had been conditional on their perception of my success. I'd been treated as family when they thought I was successful, excluded when they thought I was failing, and now welcomed back with new enthusiasm when they discovered I was more successful than they'd imagined. Moving forward does matter, I agreed. But I think it's important to acknowledge that exclusion from family events based on employment status isn't something that should happen again, regardless of anyone's financial situation. Kyle raised his glass again. I can definitely agree to that. Family is family, period. His declaration was simple but profound, establishing a principle that should have been obvious, but apparently needed to be stated explicitly in our family dynamic. The server arrived to take our orders, providing a natural break in the intense conversation. As we discussed menu options and wine pairings, I observed the subtle changes in how everyone was interacting with me. Victoria was more deferential, asking for my opinion on appetizers and genuinely listening to my responses. Dad was more attentive, making sure I had everything I needed and including me in every conversational thread. The difference was unmistakable, and it reinforced my original instinct to keep my financial situation private. These people were treating me better because they now knew I was wealthy, not because they'd recognized any flaws in their previous behavior. Once our orders were placed, Kyle leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression. You know what's funny? I spent 2 years in business school learning about entrepreneurship and successful companies. And the whole time, my sister had already done it. You should come speak to some of the entrepreneurship classes at DU. The suggestion surprised me. You think students would be interested in hearing about TechFlow solutions? Are you kidding? A case study about building and selling a software company while maintaining a day job? That's exactly the kind of real-world experience professors are always trying to bring into the classroom. Victoria nodded enthusiastically. That's a wonderful idea. You could probably develop that into consulting opportunities with the business school, maybe even teach a course on practical entrepreneurship. Her enthusiasm felt genuine, though I wondered if she would have been equally supportive of my teaching aspirations before learning about my financial success. The timing of her encouragement was telling. I might consider that, I said, though I'd want to make sure the focus was on practical business lessons rather than just the financial outcome. The real value for students would be understanding the process, the decision-making, the risk management. Dad smiled with what appeared to be genuine pride. You'd be excellent at that. You've always been good at explaining complex concepts in accessible ways. The compliment caught me off guard because it referenced qualities he'd recognized in me independent of my financial success. It suggested that perhaps some of his newfound attention was based on genuinely seeing me more clearly rather than just being impressed by my bank account. As our appetizers arrived, the conversation shifted to Kyle's career plans and his interviews with Denver-based companies. He was animated about the opportunities, clearly energized by the prospect of applying his MBA education to real business challenges. I've got a final interview next week with a renewable energy startup, he said. It's exactly the kind of company I want to work for, trying to solve important problems while building a sustainable business. Startups can be incredible learning experiences, I told him. You get exposure to every aspect of business operations, from product development to customer acquisition to fundraising. If they're well managed and properly capitalized, it's often better professional development than working for a large corporation. Kyle's eyes lit up. That's what I was thinking. The salary isn't as high as some of the corporate offers, but the equity opportunity and learning curve seem much more valuable long-term. Victoria looked concerned. Equity can be risky, though, can't it? If the company doesn't succeed, those stock options might not be worth anything. That's true, I acknowledged. But Kyle's young, and this is exactly the time to take calculated risks on high-potential opportunities. Even if the startup doesn't succeed, the experience and network he'd build could be invaluable for future ventures. Dad nodded approvingly. Natasha's right. Kyle, you have the luxury of taking some professional risks while you're young and unattached. That's when you can afford to pursue opportunities based on learning potential rather than just immediate compensation. The family discussion about Kyle's career felt different from any conversation we'd had about my professional choices. There was support for risk-taking, encouragement to pursue passion over security, acknowledgement that career development required strategic thinking about long-term growth. I wondered if they would have offered me similar encouragement if I'd discussed leaving Morrison Associates to focus full-time on TechFlow solutions. Would they have supported my entrepreneurial ambitions, or would they have counseled me to maintain the security of traditional employment? The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd successfully navigated the exact career transition they were now encouraging Kyle to consider, but I'd done it without their knowledge or support. As our main courses arrived, Victoria raised her wine glass. I'd like to propose a toast, she said, her voice carrying a formality that suggested preparation. To Kyle's graduation and bright future, to Natasha's remarkable achievements and new opportunities, and to family bonds that grow stronger through honest communication. The toast was diplomatic, acknowledging both Kyle's celebration and my revelations while positioning recent tensions as communication issues rather than fundamental problems with family dynamics. We raised our glasses, though I noted that the honest communication she referenced had been entirely one-sided. I'd revealed significant information about my life and accomplishments, while they'd offered no reciprocal insights into their motivations or assumptions. Kyle grinned as he set down his glass, and to sisters who are way more badass than their little brothers realized. His comment drew genuine laughter from the table, the first moment all evening that felt completely natural and unforced. Despite the complex family dynamics and recent revelations, Kyle's affection for me appeared authentic and uncomplicated. As we worked through our entrees, the conversation gradually moved away from career topics toward more general family updates. Victoria shared news about her book club and charity involvement. Dad discussed a fishing trip he was planning with college friends. Kyle talked about his post-graduation travel plans. The normalcy was both welcome and strange. On the surface, we looked like any successful family celebrating a milestone achievement. Underneath, fundamental assumptions about relationships and worth had been challenged and remained unresolved. When the server brought dessert menus, Dad checked his watch with surprise. "I can't believe we've been here for over 2 hours. Time flies when you're having good conversation." The comment felt genuine, suggesting he'd actually enjoyed the evening despite its intensity. Perhaps the revelation of my success had allowed him to see me as an equal, rather than someone whose life choices he needed to evaluate and critique. As we debated dessert options, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "How's the family dinner? Survived the awkwardness yet?" I smiled at her message, grateful for the reminder that I had relationships based on genuine affection rather than conditional approval. Sophie had supported me through every phase of building TechFlow solutions, celebrated the sale with me, and offered comfort during recent family tensions. Her friendship represented what I'd hoped to maintain with family members through financial privacy. "Who's texting during family dinner?" Kyle asked with mock indignation. "Sophie checking to make sure you're all treating me well," I replied, showing him the message. Kyle grinned. "Tell her we're on our best behavior, mostly." The exchange highlighted something important about the evening. Despite the tensions and revelations, Kyle's relationship with me felt largely unchanged. He'd been shocked by my entrepreneurial success, but his fundamental affection and respect had remained constant. As we finished dessert and Dad signaled for the check, Victoria turned to me with an expression that seemed carefully composed. "Natasha, I want you to know that I'm genuinely sorry about the misunderstanding regarding tonight's dinner. Regardless of employment situations or any other circumstances, you're family, and you should always feel welcome at family gatherings." The apology was more complete than I'd expected, though I noticed she still characterized the exclusion as a misunderstanding rather than acknowledging it had been a deliberate decision based on problematic assumptions. "Thank you, Victoria. I appreciate that." Dad reached for his wallet, but I intercepted the gesture. "Let me get this one. It's Kyle's celebration, and I'd like to contribute to honoring his achievement." The offer to pay was both practical and symbolic. I could easily afford the expensive dinner, and doing so demonstrated both generosity and financial capability. It also established a precedent for me contributing to family events as an equal, rather than someone whose attendance was contingent on others' generosity. Dad looked surprised but pleased. "That's very generous, Natasha. Thank you." As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Kyle pulled me aside. "Hey, I know tonight was probably weird with all the family stuff that's been going on, but I'm really glad you came. And I'm incredibly proud of what you've accomplished, even if I'm just learning about it now." His words carried a sincerity that cut through all the evening's complexity. Whatever else had happened with our parents, Kyle's support felt genuine and uncomplicated. "Thank you, Kyle. That means a lot to me. And I'm proud of you too. MBA with honors is a real achievement, and I know you're going to do great things in whatever career path you choose." Walking out of the Sterling room into the Denver evening, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty. The dinner had gone better than I'd feared, but hadn't resolved the fundamental issues that my revelations had exposed. My family now knew about my financial success and entrepreneurial achievements, but they hadn't truly grappled with how their conditional support and exclusionary behavior reflected deeper problems in our relationships. The real test would come in the weeks and months ahead, as we settled into new dynamics based on complete information rather than assumptions and misunderstandings. The momentum I'd gained from the family dinner carried into the following week with a series of decisions that would reshape both my professional trajectory and family relationships in ways I hadn't anticipated. Monday morning brought another call from Jonathan Hayes, this time with news that would accelerate my timeline for taking control of my own narrative. Natasha, the Meridian Technologies pre-IPO investment has been executed, but I'm calling with even better news. We've been approached by venture capital firm Pinnacle Partners about a co-investment opportunity in a portfolio of early-stage companies. Your track record with TechFlow Solutions has caught their attention. I was sitting in my downtown loft, coffee in hand, watching the morning bustle of Denver's business district through my windows. The call felt like confirmation that my decision to reveal my financial situation had been correct, opening doors that secrecy had kept closed. How did Pinnacle Partners learn about TechFlow Solutions? I asked, curious about how word was spreading through investment circles. The venture capital community is smaller than people realize, especially for successful exits in the software sector. Your acquisition by Global Tech has been referenced in several industry analyses, and Pinnacle has been tracking entrepreneurs who've successfully built and sold companies. They're particularly interested in founders who might want to become active investors. The concept intrigued me immediately. Rather than simply managing my own wealth, I could leverage my entrepreneurial experience to help other founders navigate the challenges I'd overcome. It represented a natural evolution from building my own company to supporting others who were attempting similar journeys. What kind of investment commitment are they looking for? I asked. Initially, they're suggesting $5 million across a diversified portfolio of 10 to 12 companies. You'd have the opportunity to work directly with founders, providing mentorship alongside capital. It's exactly the kind of arrangement that could evolve into a full-time venture capital role if you found it fulfilling. $5 million. The amount represented more than a third of my liquid assets, a substantial commitment that would fundamentally change my relationship with money from passive management to active deployment. It was also exactly the kind of strategic decision that wealthy people made to build influence and create meaningful work. Send me the portfolio details and investment memorandum, I said. I want to review the companies and meet with the Pinnacle team before making a decision. After ending the call, I realized I was excited in a way I hadn't been since selling TechFlow Solutions. The prospect of working with early-stage entrepreneurs, applying lessons learned from my own journey, felt like a natural next chapter that combined financial opportunity with personal fulfillment. My phone rang almost immediately after Jonathan's call ended. Kyle's name appeared on the screen, which surprised me since he rarely called during business hours. "Hey Kyle, what's up? Shouldn't you be in job interviews or something productive?" His laugh sounded slightly nervous. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. I got the offer from the renewable energy startup, Solaris Clean Tech. They want me to start as their business development manager with equity upside if we hit certain growth milestones." "Kyle, that's fantastic news. Congratulations. It sounds like exactly the kind of opportunity you were hoping for." "Thanks. I'm really excited about it. But there's something else I wanted to talk to you about, and it might sound crazy." I could hear hesitation in his voice, the kind of uncertainty that comes before asking for something significant. "What's on your mind?" "Well, after hearing about your entrepreneurial experience and everything you've accomplished, I started thinking about my own career differently. Instead of just taking this job and following a traditional corporate path, what if I learned everything? I could at Solaris for 2 years, then started my own company in the renewable energy space. The question revealed how much our family dinner conversation had impacted his thinking. Kyle was reconceptualizing his career trajectory from employee to potential entrepreneur, influenced by learning about my own unconventional path. That's not crazy at all, I assured him. Working at a startup is excellent preparation for founding your own company. You'll get exposure to every aspect of business operations, understand the challenges of scaling technology companies, and build industry connections that could be invaluable when you're ready to launch something yourself. The thing is, Kyle continued, his voice gaining confidence, I've been researching solar installation efficiency, and I think there's a huge opportunity to develop software that optimizes residential solar panel placement using AI and satellite imagery. The current process is incredibly manual and inefficient. I felt a surge of recognition and excitement. Kyle was describing exactly the kind of market insight that had led me to develop TechFlow solutions. He'd identified a specific inefficiency in an industry he understood and was conceptualizing a technology solution that could create significant value. Kyle, that actually sounds like a brilliant business idea. Solar adoption is accelerating rapidly, and any technology that reduces installation costs or improves efficiency would have enormous market potential. Do you really think so? I mean, I don't have the technical background to build the software myself, but I understand the industry needs from a business perspective. Technical co-founders can be found if the business concept is strong enough. What matters most is deep understanding of customer problems and market dynamics. You'd gain that expertise working at Solaris. There was a pause before Kyle asked. The question I sensed had been building throughout our conversation. Natasha, I know this is a huge ask, but would you consider being an advisor if I ever do decide to start this company? Not necessarily financial investment, just guidance from someone who's been through the process successfully? The request touched me more than I'd expected. Kyle was asking for mentorship based on respect for my entrepreneurial experience, not because he needed money or connections. He wanted to learn from my journey, which felt like genuine recognition of what I'd accomplished. Of course, I'd be happy to advise you, I said. In fact, I might be in a position to do more than just provide guidance. I'm exploring opportunities to become an active investor in early-stage companies. If you develop a solid business plan and find the right technical co-founder, I could potentially invest in your startup. Kyle's excitement was palpable through the phone. Are you serious? You'd consider investing in a company I started? I'd consider investing in a good company started by someone I trust who has deep industry knowledge and strong business instincts. The fact that you're my stepbrother would actually make me more confident in the investment, not less. We talked for another 30 minutes about his business concept, potential technical approaches, and timeline for developing a comprehensive plan. Kyle's enthusiasm was infectious, and his thinking about the market opportunity was surprisingly sophisticated for someone just finishing business school. After our call ended, I found myself energized by the prospect of supporting Kyle's entrepreneurial ambitions. It would create a new dimension to our family relationship, one based on professional collaboration and shared interests rather than just social obligation. Later that afternoon, Victoria called with a request that initially seemed routine but quickly revealed deeper family dynamics at play. Natasha, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly, but I wanted to discuss something that's been on my mind since our dinner Friday evening. Her tone carried the careful formality she used for important conversations, suggesting this wasn't a casual check-in. Of course, Victoria. What's on your mind? Well, I've been thinking about your entrepreneurial success and your plans for the future, and I wondered if you might be interested in getting involved with some of my charitable work. The Denver Children's Hospital Foundation is always looking for successful business leaders to join our advisory board. The request seemed straightforward enough, but something about the timing and framing made me pause. Victoria had never previously sought my involvement in her philanthropic activities. Despite my professional background in marketing, that could have been relevant to fundraising efforts. That's an interesting opportunity, I said carefully. What kind of time commitment are we talking about? Monthly board meetings, occasional fundraising events, maybe some strategic consulting on our marketing approaches. The foundation has been struggling to reach younger donors, and your expertise in that area could be invaluable. Victoria's description revealed what was really happening. She wanted to leverage my newfound status as a successful entrepreneur and my marketing expertise for her own social and charitable purposes. The timing, immediately following the revelation of my financial success, made her motivations transparent. Victoria, I appreciate you thinking of me for this opportunity. Let me be direct, though. Are you asking me to join this board because you think I'd be genuinely helpful, or because having a successful entrepreneur in the family reflects well on your own social standing? The question hung in the air for a moment before Victoria responded with a careful laugh. Natasha, I think you'd be genuinely helpful. Your business success and marketing background would bring valuable perspectives to our efforts. But you never asked me to join charitable boards before, despite having the same marketing background and professional experience. What's different now? Victoria's pause before answering confirmed what I suspected. I suppose I didn't fully understand the scope of your business accomplishments before. Now that I do, I can see how much value you could add to organizations, like the foundation. Her honesty was refreshing, even if the underlying dynamic was troubling. Victoria was acknowledging that her assessment of my potential contributions had been based on incomplete information about my success and financial resources. I'll consider the board opportunity, I said, but I want to be clear that my involvement in charitable work will be based on causes I'm personally passionate about, not on enhancing anyone else's social standing. If I join the Children's Hospital Foundation, it will be because I believe in their mission and think I can make a meaningful contribution. Of course, Victoria agreed quickly. That's exactly how charitable involvement should work. After ending the call, I reflected on how rapidly family dynamics were shifting as people adjusted to new information about my circumstances. Kyle was seeking mentorship and collaboration based on genuine respect for my expertise. Victoria was looking for ways to leverage my success for her own social purposes. Dad hadn't reached out directly, but I suspected he was processing the revelations in his own way. Wednesday brought a call from Sophie that would prove pivotal in my decision-making about both family relationships and professional direction. Natasha, I need to tell you something that might complicate your family situation even more, she said without preamble. That sounds ominous. What's going on? You know how I work at a law firm that handles estate planning and family wealth management? Well, without getting into confidential details, I can tell you that your father has been meeting with our senior partners about updating his will and estate plans. I felt a chill of apprehension. Is Dad sick? Is there something wrong health-wise that I should know about? No, nothing like that. This is more about adjusting asset distribution based on changed family circumstances. Natasha, I think your revelation about TechFlow Solutions has made him reconsider how he's planned to leave his estate. The implication hit me immediately. Dad was likely adjusting his will to account for the fact that I wasn't the financially vulnerable daughter he'd assumed, but rather someone with substantial independent wealth who might not need inheritance protection. Sophie, that's actually fine with me. I don't need Dad's money, and if he wants to adjust his estate planning based on accurate information about everyone's circumstances, that makes perfect sense. But here's the thing, Sophie continued. From what I can tell through office conversations, he's not just adjusting distribution amounts. He's considering conditions and requirements for inheritance that seem designed to influence behavior rather than just transfer wealth. Conditional inheritance based on meeting certain life milestones or behavioral expectations was exactly the kind of controlling mechanism I'd been trying to avoid through financial independence. The idea that Dad might use estate planning as a tool for ongoing influence over family members was deeply troubling. "What kind of conditions?" I asked. "I can't share specifics without violating confidentiality, but generally speaking, these kinds of arrangements often include requirements about career choices, family relationships, geographic location, even personal lifestyle decisions." The conversation left me with a growing sense that achieving financial independence from my family hadn't eliminated their desire to control or influence my life choices. It had simply changed the mechanisms they might use to maintain leverage. Thursday afternoon brought the opportunity I'd been waiting for without realizing it. Marcus Thompson, my former business partner from the early days of TechFlow Solutions, called with a proposition that would allow me to take complete control of my professional narrative. "Natasha, I've been following your situation since the Global Tech acquisition, and I have a proposal that might interest you. I'm launching a new venture capital fund focused specifically on software startups, founded by women and underrepresented entrepreneurs. I want you to be my co-founding partner." Marcus had been instrumental in TechFlow Solutions' early development, providing technical expertise while I handled business development and strategy. Our partnership had been successful because our skills complemented each other perfectly, and we'd maintained a strong professional relationship even after the acquisition. "Tell me more about the fund concept," I said, immediately intrigued. "Diversity in venture capital has been a problem for decades, but it's finally getting serious. Attention from institutional investors. We could raise a $50 million fund focused on early-stage software companies, providing both capital and intensive mentorship. Your track record as a successful founder, combined with my technical background, would be a compelling combination for limited partners." The opportunity was exactly what I'd been seeking without knowing it. Rather than being a passive investor in other people's funds, I could create my own investment vehicle focused on entrepreneurs who faced similar challenges to what I'd experienced building TechFlow Solutions. "Marcus, that sounds incredible. It would allow us to support founders who might be overlooked by traditional venture capital while building a financially successful fund based on identifying undervalued opportunities." "Exactly. And Natasha, timing is perfect. The market is hungry for diverse fund managers with proven track records. Your TechFlow story, combined with the portfolio we could build together, would attract both institutional capital and deal flow from impressive founders." We spent an hour discussing fund structure, investment strategy, and operational logistics. By the end of the conversation, I was convinced that co-founding a venture capital fund with Marcus represented the perfect next chapter for my career. It would leverage my entrepreneurial experience, provide meaningful work supporting other founders, and establish me as an active player in the Denver startup ecosystem. "I'm in," I told Marcus. "Let's start developing the fund prospectus and limited partner presentation." After ending the call, I realized I'd just made the decision that would define my professional future for the next several years. More importantly, I'd chosen a path that was entirely independent of family expectations or approval. Whether Dad supported my career choice, whether Victoria could leverage my success for her own purposes, whether Kyle wanted mentorship and investment, all of that would happen within the context of my own chosen professional identity. Friday morning brought a text from Dad that suggested he was ready for a conversation about how our family dynamics would evolve given everything that had been revealed. "Natasha, could we have lunch today? Just the two of us. There are things we should discuss." I agreed to meet him at a quiet restaurant near his accounting office, sensing that this conversation would be different from our previous interactions. The revelation of my financial success had forced him to reconsider fundamental assumptions about our relationship, and I suspected he'd been processing the implications all week. Dad was already seated when I arrived, looking thoughtful and slightly nervous. He stood to hug me, a gesture that felt more genuine than the social politeness he'd displayed at Kyle's dinner. "Thank you for making time for this," he said as we settled into our booth. "I've been thinking all week about our conversation, about the assumptions I made, about how I've been treating you." His directness surprised me. Dad wasn't typically one for emotional introspection or acknowledgement of interpersonal mistakes. "I'm glad we're talking," I said. "A lot has been revealed recently that changes how we understand each other. Natasha, I owe you an apology. Not just for the dinner situation, though that was wrong, but for fundamentally misunderstanding who you are and what you've accomplished. I let my own narrow definition of success blind me to what you were actually achieving." The apology felt more substantial than Victoria's diplomatic words earlier in the week. Dad was acknowledging that his judgment of me had been based on incomplete information and flawed assumptions. "I appreciate that, Dad, but I think it's important to understand why I kept my business success private. I wanted family relationships based on genuine affection, not on being impressed by financial achievements." Dad nodded slowly. "I understand that now, though I wish you'd felt comfortable sharing such a significant part of your life with us. Building and selling TechFlow solutions was an extraordinary accomplishment. We should have been celebrating your success, not questioning your life choices. The problem wasn't just that you didn't know about the business. It was that when you thought I was struggling professionally, your response was exclusion and criticism rather than support and encouragement." The observation forced Dad to confront the conditional nature of his approval and affection. When he thought I was successful as a corporate employee, I was welcome at family events. When he thought I was failing professionally, I became a social liability to be managed and hidden. "You're right," he admitted. "I tied my assessment of your worth to external measures of conventional success. That was wrong, and it reflected poorly on me as a father." We ordered lunch, but the conversation remained focused on family dynamics and relationship expectations. Dad seemed genuinely interested in understanding how his behavior had affected me and in establishing a different foundation for our ongoing relationship. "Natasha, I also want to be transparent about something else. I've been meeting with estate planning attorneys to update my will and financial arrangements." The confirmation of what Sophie had hinted at made me tense slightly, uncertain about where this conversation was heading. "I want you to know that learning about your financial independence has actually made my estate planning simpler and more equitable. Instead of trying to provide financial security for children with vastly different needs, I can focus on creating arrangements that reflect everyone's actual circumstances." Dad's approach seemed reasonable, though I remained cautious about potential conditions or requirements attached to inheritance planning. "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means that Kyle, who's just starting his career, will receive more liquid assets to help establish his financial foundation. You, who've already achieved financial independence, will inherit assets that reflect your interests and capabilities rather than just money." The distinction intrigued me. "What kind of assets?" "The accounting practice if you want it, or the option to sell it and use the proceeds however you choose. My personal real estate holdings, some family heirlooms and personal items that connect you to your mother's memory." Dad's approach felt thoughtful rather than controlling. He was designing inheritance arrangements that acknowledged different family members' circumstances while avoiding conditional requirements or behavioral mandates. "That sounds very fair," I said, "and I appreciate that you're thinking about inheritance in terms of what would be meaningful rather than just financially beneficial." "Your mother would have approached it the same way," Dad said, his voice carrying a warmth that I hadn't heard in years. "She always believed that wealth should support people's authentic goals, not dictate their life choices." The reference to my mother felt significant, the first time Dad had spoken about her spontaneously since remarrying. It suggested he was reconnecting with values and perspectives that had been important during their marriage, but had gotten lost in his new family configuration. As we finished lunch, I felt that our relationship had achieved a new equilibrium, based on mutual respect and accurate information. Dad was seeing me as an accomplished adult whose choices deserved consideration, while I was able to appreciate his efforts to adapt his behavior based on new understanding. Walking back to my car, I realized that taking control of my own narrative had created space for more authentic relationships with family members who were willing to adjust their assumptions and expectations. The process hadn't been comfortable, but it had been necessary for establishing connections based on reality rather than projection. 6 months after that life-changing family dinner, I stood in the glass-walled conference room of Reynolds Thompson Ventures, our newly established venture capital fund, watching the Denver skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning. Sun cast long shadows across the city, illuminating a landscape that had become both familiar and entirely new since I'd started living authentically as the person I'd always been underneath the careful facades. Marcus was presenting to our third prospective limited partner of the week, a family office from California that managed wealth for technology entrepreneurs who'd built and sold companies similar to mine. The irony wasn't lost on me that 18 months ago, I'd been hiding my own successful exit, while now I was leveraging that exact experience to attract investment capital from other successful founders. Our thesis is straightforward, Marcus was explaining to the potential investors. The best early-stage software investments often come from founders who've been overlooked by traditional venture capital. Women, minorities, entrepreneurs from non-coastal markets. These founders frequently build better companies because they understand underserved markets and operate with greater capital efficiency. I watched the California investors nodding with interest as Marcus outlined our investment strategy. Our fund prospectus was built around the idea that diversity wasn't just socially responsible investing, it was smart investing. Companies led by diverse founding teams consistently outperformed homogeneous ones, yet continued to receive disproportionately less venture capital. Ms. Reynolds, one of the investors addressed me directly. Your own experience building and selling TechFlow solutions while maintaining a day job is exactly the kind of overlooked entrepreneurial story our investment committee finds compelling. How do you identify similar founders who might be flying under the radar? The question allowed me to discuss something I'd become passionate about over the past months. Since publicly sharing my entrepreneurial journey, I'd been contacted by dozens of founders who were building companies in unconventional ways, often while maintaining other professional obligations or personal responsibilities that made traditional venture capital inaccessible. We look for founders who are solving real problems with elegant solutions, regardless of whether they fit the typical venture capital profile, I explained. Many of the most innovative companies are built by people who understand their customers intimately because they've experienced the problem firsthand. These founders often bootstrap longer, iterate more thoughtfully, and build more sustainable businesses than entrepreneurs who raise capital too early. After the meeting concluded successfully, with the California family office committing $2 million to our fund, Marcus and I walked to a nearby coffee shop to debrief. Our fundraising was ahead of schedule, with commitments totaling $38 million toward our $50 million target. 6 more months and we'll be fully capitalized, Marcus said with satisfaction. I have to admit, when I first proposed this partnership, I wasn't sure how quickly we'd be able to establish credibility with institutional investors. The TechFlow story helps, I acknowledged. But I think what really resonates with limited partners is our operational approach. We're not just writing checks, we're providing hands-on support based on experience building companies ourselves. Our fund was structured differently from traditional venture capital. Instead of managing dozens of investments with minimal involvement, we plan to work intensively with 8 to 10 companies, providing both capital and strategic guidance throughout their growth phases. It was more work than passive investing, but infinitely more rewarding than managing my own portfolio in isolation. My phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. Board meeting went great. Secured Series A funding. Ready to hire our first engineers. Thanks for the intro to Sarah at Pinnacle Partners. Kyle's solar optimization startup, SolarSync Technologies, had become our fund's first investment 6 months ago. His business concept had evolved into a comprehensive software platform that used artificial intelligence and satellite imagery to optimize residential solar installations, exactly as he'd envisioned during our initial conversation. More importantly, Kyle had proven himself as a capable entrepreneur who could execute on ambitious technical visions. His 2 years at Solaris Clean Tech had provided exactly the industry expertise and professional network he'd needed to launch his own company successfully. I texted back, "Congratulations, Series A is a major milestone. Looking forward to hearing about your hiring plans at our next board meeting." The relationship Kyle and I had developed around his startup had become one of the most rewarding aspects of my transition into venture capital. Instead of the awkward family dynamics that had characterized our previous interactions, we now had a professional partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. Kyle had also surprised everyone by becoming the family member most interested in understanding my entrepreneurial journey and the lessons it offered for his own career development. He regularly asked for advice on strategic decisions, and his questions were sophisticated enough to challenge my own thinking about business development and growth strategies. That afternoon brought a call from Victoria that I'd been anticipating for several weeks. She'd been increasingly involved in promoting my participation in various Denver charitable and social organizations, using my business success to enhance her own social standing in ways that had become impossible to ignore. "Natasha, I have wonderful news. The Colorado Women's Foundation wants to honor you as their Entrepreneur of the Year at their annual gala next month. It would be such tremendous recognition for everything you've accomplished. The award was legitimate, and the foundation did important work supporting women's economic empowerment throughout the state. However, I'd noticed a pattern in Victoria's recommendations for my community involvement. Every opportunity she suggested was highly visible, socially prestigious, and enhanced her own reputation as someone connected to successful people. Victoria, I appreciate the foundation thinking of me for this recognition, but I need to ask you something directly. Are you recommending these opportunities because you think they align with my interests and values, or because they reflect well on your social connections?" There was a pause before Victoria responded with her carefully modulated voice. "Natasha, I think you'd be genuinely beneficial to these organizations. Your success story and business expertise would inspire other women entrepreneurs." "That may be true, but it doesn't answer my question about your motivations for making these recommendations." Victoria's silence suggested she was struggling with how to respond honestly without damaging our relationship further. "I suppose I do take some pride in having a successful entrepreneur in the family," she finally admitted. "But that doesn't diminish my belief that you'd contribute meaningfully to these organizations." Her honesty was refreshing, even if the underlying dynamic remained problematic. Victoria was acknowledging that my professional achievements had become a source of reflected social status for her, which explained the sudden increase in her interest in my community involvement. "Victoria, I'm willing to consider charitable work that aligns with my personal values and allows me to contribute expertise in areas where I can make a real difference. But I won't participate in activities that are primarily about enhancing anyone else's social standing, including my own." "I understand," she said, though her tone suggested disappointment. "Perhaps you could let me know what kinds of causes you're passionate about, and I could identify opportunities that would be genuinely meaningful to you." The conversation ended cordially, but it highlighted how financial success had changed every family relationship in ways I was still navigating. Victoria now saw me as a social asset to be leveraged, which was better than being seen as a liability to be hidden, but it wasn't necessarily more authentic. Later that week, Dad and I met for lunch at our usual restaurant near his accounting office. These monthly meetings had become a routine that we both valued, providing space for ongoing conversations about family relationships and business developments without the social pressure of larger gatherings. "How's the fundraising progressing?" he asked after we'd ordered. Dad had become genuinely interested in my venture capital work, asking thoughtful questions about investment strategy and portfolio company development. "We're at 38 million committed toward our 50 million target," I told him. "At this pace, we'll be fully capitalized by the end of the year and ready to accelerate our investment activity." "That's impressive progress for a new fund. Your reputation from TechFlow Solutions is obviously opening doors, but you and Marcus must be presenting a compelling investment thesis." Dad's assessment reflected how much our relationship had evolved. Instead of questioning my career choices or offering unsolicited advice, he was asking about my work with genuine curiosity and treating me as a peer whose professional judgment he respected. "The market timing has been favorable," I acknowledged. "Institutional investors are actively looking for diverse fund managers with operational experience. Our track record building companies gives us credibility that purely financial investors can't match." Speaking of track records, I wanted to mention that Kyle's been asking me questions about business finance and accounting principles. He says you recommended he develop a better understanding of financial management as his company grows. Kyle's proactive approach to learning business fundamentals had impressed me during our recent board meetings. Unlike many first-time entrepreneurs who focused exclusively on product development, he was building comprehensive business skills that would serve him well as SolarSync scaled. Kyle's been incredibly thoughtful about building expertise in areas where he wasn't naturally strong, I said. Most technical founders struggle with the business side of entrepreneurship, but he's been deliberately developing those capabilities. Dad smiled with obvious pride. He credits you with helping him understand that successful entrepreneurship requires both technical and business competencies. I think your mentorship has been invaluable for his development. The acknowledgement felt significant because it represented Dad recognizing my positive influence on Kyle's career development. Instead of seeing my professional success as separate from family relationships, he was appreciating how my experience could benefit other family members. Kyle's success is ultimately about his own hard work and natural business instincts, I said. I've just been able to share some lessons learned from my own mistakes and discoveries. Nevertheless, having a successful entrepreneur as a sister has clearly accelerated his learning curve. The family connections are working in positive directions now. Dad's observation highlighted how much our family dynamics had improved since everyone began operating with accurate information about each other's circumstances and capabilities. Instead of assumptions and misunderstandings driving behavior, we were building relationships based on authentic understanding and mutual respect. 3 weeks later, I found myself preparing for an event that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. The University of Denver's Business School had invited me to deliver the keynote address at their annual entrepreneurship conference, speaking to several hundred students, faculty, and local business leaders about building successful companies while maintaining personal values and authentic relationships. Standing backstage before my presentation, I reflected on how dramatically my public identity had evolved. 12 months ago, I'd been hiding my entrepreneurial success to preserve family relationships that turned out to be based on false assumptions. Now I was sharing my story publicly as a way to inspire other entrepreneurs and attract investment opportunities to my fund. The topic I'd chosen for my keynote was Building Companies and Authentic Relationships, Why Success Requires Both. The theme reflected my conviction that professional achievement meant little if it came at the expense of genuine connections with people who mattered. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Natasha Reynolds, co-founder of Reynolds Thompson Ventures and founder of TechFlow Solutions. Walking onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, I saw Kyle sitting in the front row with several of his former business school classmates. His presence felt like validation that our family relationships had evolved in genuinely positive directions, built on mutual respect rather than social obligation. 2 years ago, I was working as a senior project manager at a marketing firm while secretly building a software company during evenings and weekends. I began my presentation. I thought I was protecting my family relationships by keeping my entrepreneurial activities private. I didn't want money or business success to change how people treated me. I could see audience members leaning forward with interest as I described the challenge of maintaining authentic relationships while achieving financial success. What I learned was that hiding significant aspects of your life doesn't protect relationships. It prevents them from being authentic. When I lost my day job and my family excluded me from celebrations because they thought I was a professional failure, I realized that conditional support based on external measures of success isn't actually support at all. The audience was completely engaged as I walked through my decision to reveal my business success and the family dynamics that followed. I shared lessons about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who support your authentic self rather than carefully managed versions of who you think they want you to be. The entrepreneurs who build the most successful companies and maintain the most meaningful relationships are those who refuse to compartmentalize their lives. They integrate their professional ambitions with their personal values, and they surround themselves with people who appreciate both their achievements and their character. After my presentation concluded to standing applause, Kyle approached with a broad smile and obvious pride. "That was incredible, Natasha. You managed to tell our family story in a way that was both honest and generous. I don't think anyone came across as a villain, even though you didn't minimize the problems we had to work through." His assessment reflected something I'd tried to achieve in my presentation. Rather than positioning family members as antagonists, in my entrepreneurial journey, I'd focused on how misunderstandings and assumptions had created problems that honest communication eventually resolved. "Family relationships are complicated," I told Kyle. "People make mistakes based on limited information or flawed assumptions. What matters is whether they're willing to adjust their behavior when they get better information." Mom and Dad both adjusted pretty well considering how dramatic the revelations were, Kyle observed. "Though I think Victoria's still figuring out how to relate to you as someone with your own established success, rather than someone whose accomplishments reflect on her social status." Kyle's insight surprised me with its sophistication. He was accurately identifying the different ways family members had adapted to new information about my circumstances, and recognizing that Victoria's adjustment remained incomplete. "Victoria's working on it," I said diplomatically. "Change takes time, especially when it requires examining fundamental assumptions about relationships and social dynamics." That evening brought a family dinner at Dad and Victoria's house, the first one since Kyle's graduation celebration 6 months earlier. The gathering felt different from previous family events, less formal and more genuinely celebratory. Victoria had prepared Kyle's favorite meal in honor of his Series A funding announcement, and she'd invited me specifically to share updates about my venture capital fund's progress. Instead of trying to manage family narratives or control social dynamics, she seemed genuinely interested in hearing about everyone's professional developments. "Natasha, Kyle tells me you're considering investing in a company founded by 2 women who developed software for managing home healthcare services," Victoria said as she served dinner. "That sounds like exactly the kind of meaningful investment your fund was designed to make." Her comment revealed that she'd been paying attention to my investment philosophy and understood the social impact goals that motivated my venture capital work. It was the first time Victoria had engaged with my professional activities based on their substance rather than their social implications. Care Connect Technologies, I confirmed. The founders identified inefficiencies in how home health care providers coordinate patient care, and they've developed software that streamlines communication between caregivers, families, and medical professionals. It's exactly the kind of underserved market that traditional venture capital often overlooks. Dad leaned forward with interest. "What's the market opportunity for that kind of healthcare technology?" "Enormous," Kyle interjected before I could respond. "The aging population means home healthcare demand is exploding, but most providers are still using paper-based systems or basic spreadsheets to manage patient information. Software that improves coordination and efficiency could transform the entire industry." Kyle's analysis demonstrated how much his business thinking had Developed since starting his own company, he was identifying market trends and technological opportunities with the sophistication of an experienced entrepreneur. Kyle's exactly right, I agreed. CareConnect could become the foundational software platform for home healthcare providers, similar to how TechFlow solutions became essential infrastructure for business process automation. The conversation continued throughout dinner, with everyone contributing insights about healthcare technology, venture capital trends, and entrepreneurship challenges. It felt like the kind of family discussion I'd always hoped we could have, based on mutual interest and respect rather than social performance. As we cleared dishes after dessert, Victoria pulled me aside for a private conversation. Natasha, I want to thank you for how you've handled everything over the past year. The way you've shared your success story, supported Kyle's entrepreneurship, and maintained family relationships despite some difficult moments. It's shown tremendous maturity and generosity. Her acknowledgement felt genuine and significant. Victoria was recognizing not just my professional achievements, but the character qualities I'd demonstrated in navigating complex family dynamics. Thank you, Victoria. I think we've all grown through this process. Learning to base relationships on accurate information rather than assumptions has been good for everyone. I also want you to know that I'm proud to have you as a stepdaughter. Your entrepreneurial success is impressive, but your integrity and loyalty to family even when we didn't deserve it, that's what I admire most. Victoria's words represented the most authentic acknowledgement she'd ever given me. Instead of seeing me as a reflection of her own social status, she was appreciating qualities that existed independent of external success measures. Driving home through Denver's quiet streets that night, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed since that devastating morning when I'd lost my job at Morrison Associates. What had felt like professional failure had actually been the catalyst for claiming my authentic identity and building relationships based on genuine understanding rather than careful image management. The family that had excluded me from celebrations because they thought I was professionally unsuccessful now celebrated my achievements while understanding that my worth wasn't dependent on external validation. Kyle had evolved from a distant stepbrother into a close friend and business partner whose own entrepreneurial journey I was privileged to support. Most importantly, I'd learned that hiding parts of yourself to protect relationships actually prevents those relationships from being authentic. The people who matter will adjust their assumptions when presented with accurate information. Those who can't or won't adjust probably weren't worth protecting in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus as I pulled into my apartment building's parking garage. Limited partner meeting confirmed for Monday. We officially closed the fund at $52 million. Time to start changing some lives. $52 million under management, representing the trust of institutional investors who believed in our ability to identify and support exceptional entrepreneurs. It was more responsibility than I'd ever imagined having, and more opportunity to create positive impact than I'd dreamed possible. Walking into my downtown loft, I looked around at the space that had remained my sanctuary throughout every phase of this journey. The exposed brick walls, the city views, the carefully chosen furniture that reflected my personal taste rather than anyone else's expectations. It was still home, but I was no longer the same person who'd hidden her success to preserve relationships. That turned out to be conditional. The woman who'd been told she wasn't welcome at family dinners because of job loss had become someone whose professional expertise was sought by entrepreneurs across the country. The daughter who'd been excluded from celebrations had become the family member others turned to for business advice and career guidance. They'd treated me like a failure when I was secretly worth more than any of them had ever imagined. Now, they celebrated my success, but more importantly, they'd learned to base their relationships with me on who I actually was rather than who they'd assumed I should be. The irony wasn't lost on me that losing the job I'd kept out of habit had forced me to claim the identity I'd been hiding. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be exactly what you needed to become, who you were always meant to be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.